Rogers, one of wrestling's biggest crowd pleasers. He's the special guest on Jim Barniak's Sports Scrapbook. Next.
Back in the early 60s, before the salary wars that nowadays have turned our athletes into instant millionaires, few of our sports heroes knew the meaning of the term megabucks. But aided by the phenomena of closed-circuit television, one, Floyd Patterson, earned nearly $1 million for his rubber match title defense against Ingemar Johansson. But such paydays were otherwise unheard of. The big-name stars of the day, Wilt Chamberlain, Jim Brown, Sandy Koufax, Johnny Unitas, they couldn't match Patterson, even if they combined for a joint account. But there was one guy who came pretty close. There was a boy, a very strange, enchanted boy. They're not always so strange, not always so enchanting, but he was the Nature Boy. Nature Boy Buddy Rogers. During the golden era of professional wrestling, from 1950 to 1963, he was the golden boy, too, earning millions of dollars during that time in wrestling history. Not bad for an ex-cop from Camden, who combined muscles with good looks and a great suntan. At age 60, he still has it all. And on this edition of Sports Scrapbook, we're going to find out about some of his secrets. We're all babies in television when it comes to this man, Buddy Rogers. And I think it's, without a doubt, I think you were sports' first television star. Is that true?
Well, I guess, I was in the infancy of TV, and I believe wrestling was the only sport on TV at that particular time.
We're going back to the 40s now.
Yes.
And why? What was there about wrestling that made it so compatible with television?
Well, I don't know. I believe they chose wrestling because it's a dynamite sport. It gives a lot of action, and there's a lot of thrills to it, and a lot of things that the public really likes to see.
Buddy Rogers was a cop in Camden who used to lift weights as sort of a pastime, and from there, the wrestling career.
Well, I wrestled at the Camden YMCA in my earlier years. And after that, I turned pro in 1940 at the old Garden Pier in Atlantic City, which, by the way, just burned down a month ago.
Tell us a little bit about what the sport is like, the climate of professional wrestling now in the 40s.
In the 40s, in the 40s, you had Jimmy Londas, who was world champion, and Ed Strangler Lewis, who was a former world champion, and fellows like Chief Sanuki and Chief Chewaki, and the Dusek brothers, Jim Browning, Nick Lutz, Paul Bosch. They were all great wrestlers, and there was a lot of wrestling in them years. I mean, you didn't see much of poking in the eyes, constant hair pulling, constant kicking. There was a lot of wrestling, and the difference in my outlook of it today is that the wrestling part is a lost art today.
A lot of gimmickry today.
Yes. You know, I'm not here to knock wrestling. In fact, I'd walk off the show before I'd knock the sport. It was good to me. I was good to it. And I love wrestling and always will. It's always been my number one thing in my life. But I don't like some of the things I see today. And, you know, I'm a walking advertisement for wrestling. And people come up and talk wrestling all the time. And what I'd like to come right down to is I'd like to see a lot of this stuff just thrown out of it, really.
Well, you wrestled in what's called the golden era of wrestling.
Yes.
But let's find out how you got to the status of world champion and to the status of the game's biggest money winner. Now, you start wrestling in Camden here, and you start banging around in some of the small arenas, but something must have happened to quickly move you to the top of the heap.
Well, I believe that You know, now again, you were asking me, and I have to come right out with it the way I feel and the way it actually is. I done perhaps more for wrestling than any wrestler. I'd say there's two of us, Lou Thez and myself. We were the two wrestlers that did, in the last 25, 30 years, did the most for wrestling. And a lot of things I see in wrestling today are a lot of things that I invented, and a lot of things I'd done. And I'm constantly being emulated from anything that I see today.
Well, what happened in your own career, though, that moved you forward so quickly? What did you have going for you?
Well, I had conditioning. I had that little four-letter word called guts. I had a lot of ability. And you just couldn't hold me down. I lived, ate, slept wrestling day in and day out. That was my whole life.
Can you go back to a time period or maybe a sequence of matches where things really turned around for you and you began to gather this popularity?
Yeah, around 1943, I was a policeman in Camden at the time. In that era is where I first started to really turn around and really catch on as far as the public was concerned. And then 1945, right after the war, I went down to Texas and won my first big title, the Texas state title. And that was the biggest thing happened to me at that period of time.
We have a picture we can see in just a few seconds of you wrestling in Chicago, Comiskey Park, with 41,000 people in attendance. And that would be unheard of today, I think.
Well, it's been unheard of as far as I know. I've never heard of another crowd in wrestling that large. But there was a tremendous interest in wrestling in them years. And people loved wrestling. And sure, you hear a lot of negatives on wrestling today, but it's just a case of mismatching or, again, there's a lot of things that could be turned around to where they could draw 40,000 people again. And them years, we had people wrestling-minded, and they just loved wrestling. And that's why we drew like we did.
You had some flair, too, called Nature Boy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure did.
Where'd you pick up that tag?
First time I wrestled in the Hollywood Legion Stadium on the coast. I had a real heavy tan. I just come out of Galveston, Texas, and I wore a little white jacket then, and I opened up that jacket, and everybody started screaming, "Nature Boy." And my manager at the time said, "Man, they just tagged you with a hell of a name." And from that time, it stuck.
And then by, the late 50s, you were on top. You were the world's champ, and you were the biggest draw in the sport. And I guess, as we mentioned, maybe Floyd Patterson might have been making some more money than you, but next to him, there was nobody else near your bracket.
Oh, I guess God was with me, and I was very fortunate. I did draw a lot of money in the field. And,
how hard did you have to work at it? I mean, how often were you wrestling?
Oh, 3-4 times a week. I do that for, I guess, about 9 months out of the year. And then 3 months out of each year, I'd lay around the beach. I'm a sun bug.
But packing them in?
Oh, yes. There was, at the height of TV, I'd say all started really around 53, 54.